Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. It took 50 days, but Joe Biden and Democrats have finally passed their $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill. This is the third relief bill. Yeah. Since the start of the pandemic, the House passed a version of the bill previously. Then the Senate over the weekend passed a slightly different version. That's the version which yesterday the House of Representatives passed, making this a done deal with Joe Biden's imminent signature. The money will start going out soon. Here is the moment that the bill passed in the House of Representatives yesterday.
On this vote, the yeas are 220, the nays are 211. The motion is adopted. Section of motion.
Now, you will note that the bill passed with 220 Democratic yes votes, one Democrat voting no, and all Republicans who voting no. Not a single Republican voted for the COVID relief bill in the Senate. Not a single Republican voted for the COVID relief bill in the House of Representatives. 75% of the country, which means tens of millions of Republican voters, 75% of the country supports the bill, and yet not one Republican voting in favor. Who exactly are Republicans representing? Because clearly they are not representing their own constituents. But let's focus on what is in the bill. There's the part for individuals, and then there's the part for state governments and organizations. For individuals, there will be cash payments up to $1,400 for people earning up to $80,000, or $120,000 for single parents, or $160,000 for couples. Now, to get the full $1,400, the income limit is $75K per person. It will start phasing out, but you get something all the way up to $80,000 as an individual, $120,000 if you are a single parent, and $160,000 in income for couples. Dependent college students and dependent older relatives also count here. That was not the case in previous bills. Enhanced unemployment is part of this, $300 per week of extra unemployment above and beyond what your state offers if you are unemployed. That is extended through the 6th of September, and then up to $10,200 of unemployment benefits received in 2020 are tax-free for household incomes up to $150,000. In general, unemployment benefits are taxable income subject to your total family's household income. In general, you pay taxes on unemployment income if you earn $140,000 a year in income, because that is a tax bracket at which you pay taxes. In this particular case, up to $10,200 of unemployment benefits from last year would be tax-free, assuming your household income is under $150,000. The child tax credit is being increased up to $3,000 per child, and $3,600 for kids 5 years of age and under. And the limit, the age limit for the child tax credit also being increased from 16 to 17, which will include many additional children. So there's a few other things for individuals. That's the bulk of what has been passed for individuals, maybe like you, depending on your financial and family situation. And then at the larger level, the bill also includes, among other things, $350 billion for state, local, and tribal governments for pandemic response and reaction, $10 billion for critical state infrastructure, $14 billion for vaccine distribution, very important, $130 billion for primary and secondary schools, very important, and this will come up again later, schools that want to open, but they need money in order to be able to do the things that the CDC has designated should be done for schools to open safely. $30 billion for transit agencies, also very much affected by low ridership as a result of the pandemic, and $45 billion in rental, utility, and mortgage assistance. So it took 50 days. It's $1,400, totaling $2,000. if you include the stimulus from 6 months ago, rather than $2,000, doesn't include the $15 minimum wage, but Republicans wanted to pass nothing. And we have this ongoing question, will Republicans be held accountable by voters electorally nearly 2 years from now in 2022? I believe the answer is no, even though 75% of the country wants the bill and not a single Republican voted for it. Voters have short memories, quite frankly. That's basically what it is. I even think that if the 2020 election had been in 2021, even in November of 2021, I think things will have been better enough that Donald Trump's disastrous handling of the pandemic might not actually have seen him removed from office. That's how short I believe voter memories are, particularly Republicans who go back very quickly to these sort of reflexive and meaningless anti-left talking points. But that is what is in the bill. We expect money to start going out possibly within 48 hours of Joe Biden's signature, which is imminent, maybe even happening today. Maybe it will already have happened even by the time you listen to today's show or watch this clip. So listen to this insanity. So the big business in the House of Representatives yesterday was passing Joe Biden's and Democrats' $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill. This happened yesterday. It passed without any Republicans voting for it. We already talked about that. OK, but that wasn't the end of the legislative day for the House of Representatives. Immediately after passing this bill, the COVID relief bill, the House went into debate about a gun bill. And on days when major legislation is passed, very often you will have more news stations and YouTube streams around the world, even streaming what's going on the floor of the House of Representatives. And it just so happened that because the House went into debate over H.R. 8, H.R. 8 is the Bipartisan Background Checks Act of 2019. Remember that 90% of the country supports universal background checks on any gun transaction, period. But most Republicans in the House don't support it. And because people around the world, after the vote on COVID relief, were still watching the House proceedings, I started getting email from viewers. I got an email from a viewer in Belgium saying, David, did you see that insanity that Lauren Boebert said about guns on the floor of the House? A viewer in the UK wrote to me and said, David, did you see Congressman Madison Cawthorn saying, come take my guns on the floor of the House? So I checked it out, and it is truly the stuff of horrors. The world cannot believe how ridiculous a large portion of our country and our elected officials are on the topic of guns. Let's look at some examples. Here is completely vapid Trumpian Republican Congressman Madison Cawthorn telling the speaker, I know you want my guns. Well, try to take them from me.
You want my guns. I know it. We all know it. Well, Mr. Speaker, you can come and take them. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York.
This is one of the foremost legislative bodies in the United States. And Madison Cawthorn is yelling at the speaker to come take my guns. The world is laughing, crying, horrified. You pick it. Lauren Boebert went to the microphone and argued against universal background checks based on a story of a man beaten to death outside her restaurant in Colorado. But the story is a lie. The man she's referring to actually died of a drug overdose. Not only is this insane, it's also a lie. Take a look at this.
There was an altercation outside of my restaurant where a man was physically beat to death. There were no weapons involved. He was beat to death by another man's hands. I have a lot of young girls who work in my restaurant, and we needed an equalizer.
The story is known to be a lie. So it's a fake story. Then Republican Congressman Chip Roy came to the microphone and started referring to how he has all these weapons, but he's not going to tell the government what weapons he has. Defiant and principled speech. Take a look.
Texans, Americans, the government is never going to know what weapons I own. Let me be clear about that. It's not going to happen.
People all over the world see that and they ask rightly, what the hell is wrong with the United States of America? Well, these people are what's wrong. Then Republican Congressman Thomas Massie also argued against universal background checks on the basis of a hard to follow hypothetical story about the victim of domestic violence who needs a gun to make it through the night. I challenge you, follow this hypothetical story.
How many of those 112,000 were prosecuted for that crime of trying to acquire that gun? According to the DOJ, 12. 1, 2, 12 in a year. Who were the other 100,000? Just imagine now that you're the victim of an abusive relationship, and after 5 years, you've summoned the courage and the resources to separate from that relationship. But things have escalated, and now you've decided it's time to acquire the means to protect you and your children. So you go to the gun store and you try to buy a gun. The clerk presses the computer button. It says denied. You ask the clerk, why was it denied? I don't know, this happens sometimes. Maybe you had a similar name to somebody else in the database. You can't buy a gun today, tomorrow, next week, not ever. You've been denied. So you go to a friend you've known for a long time. Your friend says, I'd like to help you. You say, well, I don't know if I'm going to make it through the night. The friend says, I'd like to help you, but don't you know H.R. 8 passed, and it was signed by the president. I can't spend a year in a cage. Good luck tonight.
Now, what's extra dumb about that story, actually, there's a bunch of stuff that's extra dumb about that story. First of all, maybe the person he's describing should call the police if they think they might not make it through the night unless they have the imaginary gun in the hypothetical shootout. But the problem that Congressman Massie brings up, someone might be wrongly denied a gun because their name matches that of someone who actually can't own a gun. Whether background checks are universal or not, we already have some background checks. Like the name confusion could happen regardless of whether the background checks are universal or not. It's a very strange example to argue we shouldn't. That's an argument for no background checks at all. We already have some background checks, not really an argument against making them universal. So absolutely incredible. And the world doesn't get it. The world doesn't. Why is it so embarrassing here in the United States? These are deep cultural, educational, religious, in some cases, issues. They are economic issues as well. In fact, that shouldn't be written off. There is an economic component to what we are seeing here. But we have some of the most radical people we've ever had in the House of Representatives, and they really have some serious problems, personal problems, no doubt. But also, these are just the last people that we should have making law. So another humiliating day globally for the United States, brought to you this time by the likes of Lauren Boebert and Madison Cawthorn and some of these other people. Let me know what you think when you see these rants on the floor of the House. And then remember, Friday, March 26th, one day, huge membership special. We had a tough February from the standpoint of memberships. We are trying to recover. I'm getting so wound up, I just punched my mic. We are trying to recover. And so Friday, March 26th, we will be doing a mass mailing to everybody on our newsletter. You can sign up at davidpakman.com for the newsletter with a one-day, really powerful membership special. I would love for you to be one of the people that gets on the newsletter and signs up on March 26th. All right, we'll take a quick break and be back right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
What if you could read 10 books in just one sitting? That's exactly what one of my favorite apps lets you do. It's called Blinkist, and what they do is take thousands of popular nonfiction books. They condense them down into text or audio that you can consume in 15 minutes. Blinkist makes sure that you're getting all of the important core insights from each book. So it's perfect for exploring a book you otherwise wouldn't have time for. If there's a full book you're thinking about buying, you can use Blinkist to get a sample first. Just think how much you can enrich yourself by being able to soak up an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. I recently read A Brief History of Time, of course, by the great Stephen Hawking. This is a book that I have been aware of for so long, and other things got in the way. and it was fantastic to check it out on Blinkist. Blinkist has books on politics, philosophy, science. They have 27 different nonfiction categories, and a subscription is only about $8 a month, and you get the entire library. But you can try it totally free and get 25% off a subscription when you go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. I've put the link right underneath this video.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Our show is funded primarily by members who sign up at joinpakman.com. I would love for you to be one of those folks. Go to joinpakman.com, grab a membership, get the daily bonus show. And in fact, actually, let's get right into Reddit threads, because one of them we're going to dig into in detail on the bonus show. You can join the David Pakman Show subreddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Nearly 30,000 of our viewers have, and the discussions happening there are compelling and interesting and respectful, importantly, to say the least. Couple of posts I want to signal. A user named Joaquim Raffi says, why does Pakman keep making misleading statements about the wall? In his video, Jen Psaki destroys Trump in 48 seconds. At 32 seconds, Pakman says, now it's really important to remember that even though Donald Trump didn't build the wall during his presidency, he would regularly claim that he built it and that the imaginary wall was responsible for record low undocumented crossing. This is wrong, and it isn't the first time Pakman said stuff like this. The wiki page says the U.S. built new barriers along 455 miles, 49 miles of which previously had no barrier. Going on to say, you can believe as I do Trump is a scumbag, and it's a good thing he's gone. But why is Pakman painting himself into a corner on this topic? Guys, Trump promised to build a wall across the entire U.S.-Mexico border by the end of his first term. That was the promise. Trump added 49 miles, okay? If adding 49 miles to a border that's 2,000 miles counts as building the wall, then I have a bridge to sell you. If this is your critique of the program, this is probably not the show for you. But very, very strange allegations. Another post from Rico Reckless says, are the Cuomo allegations intended to distract from the nursing home scandal? Or are the Democrats and establishment using Cuomo as the scapegoat now that Biden is in office and there's no longer a shot at Cuomo running against Trump? The second part, I think, is a no. And I don't think anyone is organized enough, nor is it clear to me that pushing sexual assault allegations against Cuomo helps him by distracting from the nursing home scandal. It's just not clear to me at all. The right, in fact, has seized more on the sexual assault scandal, even though arguably it's not better for Cuomo that the right seize on that. So it's very nebulous to me that this would be some kind of strategy. I think to me it's more what was mentioned in the comments, which is when it rains, it pours. And that it's just things, a lot of different things coming out against Andrew Cuomo. I have no reason to think, nor have I seen evidence that the Democratic Party is organized enough to say, oh, the nursing home thing is bad. Let's now bring to the forefront sexual assault allegations to take attention away from that. I think both are potentially hugely damaging to Cuomo, and we'll just have to wait and see. And then also interest on the subreddit about our former, I don't know if he's a former friend of the show. He's been on the show. Milo Yiannopoulos is now declaring that he is ex-gay. He believes that he has successfully gone through conversion therapy and is no longer a gay man. If you don't know who Milo Yiannopoulos is, congratulations. I actually envy you. But we have dealt with a lot of these ex-gay advocates on the show in the past, and we know Milo. So we're going to talk about this more extensively on the bonus show. But yes, I am aware of the Milo quitting homosexuality story. And I do have a lot to say about it, partially because we've had exchanges with Milo, and in part because we've also talked to a lot of the people that advocate for and even do supposed ex-gay conversion therapy. Wacky, dangerous stuff, to be clear. We'll talk about that more on the bonus show, but feel free to join the discussion on the subreddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Okay, this is, I don't know if this is surprising or it's not surprising, but we have another audio leak of Donald Trump pressuring Georgia officials to find him the votes that he needs. Donald Trump's call to the investigator came several days before the call with Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. You'll remember in the past, we had leaked audio of Trump on the phone with Raffensperger and others saying, I just need 11,780 votes. This new audio is from a different call where it was a few days prior to the Raffensperger call. Donald Trump is on the phone with Francis Watson, who's the chief investigator in the Georgia Secretary of State's office. We are going to listen to it. I'm realizing I don't even have my headphone in, so let me put that in so I can listen to it along with you. And I'm getting all of my cables all wound up here. Let's take a listen together. All right. New call. Okay. New call. Let's take a listen to this. Here we go. And let's make sure we aren't muted. And off we go. All right. Let's take a listen.
It's very interesting. So I won Florida in a record number, Ohio in a record, Texas in a record,
right.
Alabama by 40 points, and I won everything but Georgia. And I won Georgia. I know that by a lot. And
I won Georgia by a lot, he says.
People know it, and something happened there. I mean, something bad happened, and I hope you join that stop, because if you. I hope you're going back 2 years as opposed to just checking, one against the other, because that would just be sort of a signature check that didn't mean anything. But if you go back 2 years, and if you can get to Fulton, you're going to find things that are going to be unbelievable. The dishonesty that we've heard from them.
Right.
Just good sources, really good sources. But Fulton is the mother lode, as the expression goes, Fulton County.
Right.
And,
well, Mr. President,
I don't want to say,
right? I appreciate your comments, and I can assure you that our team and the GBI that we're only interested in the truth and finding finding the information that's based on the facts. And we've been working 12, 16-hour days, and we're working through.
Trump likes that. Working for what exactly is not clear, but
through it, and so I can assure you that. And I do appreciate you calling. I know that you're a very, very busy, very important man, and I'm very honored that you called. And and quite frankly, I'm shocked, and that you would take time to do that. But
well, he's trying to steal an election, right? I mean, this is his last. He thinks he needs this.
I'm very appreciative.
No, Mark asked me to do it. He thinks you're great, and it's just you have the most important job in the country right now, because if we win Georgia, first of all, if we win, you're going to have 2 wins. They're not going to win right now. They're down because the people of Georgia are so angry at what happened to me. They know I won by hundreds of thousands of votes. It wasn't close.
So now Trump is not even claiming. Remember, later, it seems that between this call and the next call, he believes he won by hundreds of thousands, and maybe he even thinks that there would be something done by these officials to give him such a big win. Within days, clearly his perspective has changed, because he's just talking about, I just need 11,780. And his expectations are tempered by the next call.
And Alabama, when they go, because I won South Carolina in a record, Alabama in a record, Florida in a record.
Imagine calling an official in Georgia and just bragging about your wins in other states, as if that has anything to do with what this woman's job is here.
I won Florida by 600,000 or 700,000 votes.
I think he only won Florida by a couple 100,000. Like, everything is a lie, an exaggeration.
Happened before with a Republican. And with all the money they spent, you heard all about these guys going down spending a fortune. And we won Texas by a record. Texas was won by the biggest number ever. And it didn't. And Ohio, of course, you know about that. That was won by 9 points or so.
He's the president, and he's bragging to a county, a state official in Georgia about his margins in other states. This is the president of the United States calling this person and bragging in this way.
Something, and it's all of it. Iowa. I mean, and it never made sense. And, you know, they dropped ballots. They dropped all these ballots. Stacey Abrams, really, really terrible. I mean, just a terrible thing.
Registering people to vote, getting people out. It's horrible what she did.
And I will say this. If and when, hopefully this will show, because if you go back 2 years or 4 years, you're going to see it's a totally different signature. But hopefully, I will. When the right answer comes out, you'll be praised. I mean, I don't.
When you give us the right answer, Francis, which is that I won, people will love you.
I don't know why. They made it so hard. They will be praised. People will say, "Great," because that's what it's about. That ability to check and to make it right. Because everyone knows it's wrong. There's just no way. They had people in Georgia, for instance, that won, and I was way ahead of them, and they won because of me. I pulled them, they call it coattails, right? And
so this went on for 4 more minutes, and it's just more Trump insisting he won. And to her credit, Frances Watson doesn't really concede much at all. We then just have as a reminder the clips from the previous call, which took place later, the later call, which we learned about some time ago. Here's one clip from that.
The people of Georgia are angry. The people of the country are angry. And there's nothing wrong with saying that, that you've recalculated, because the 2,236 and absentee ballots, I mean, they're all exact numbers that were done by accounting firms, law firms, etc. And even if you cut them in half, and cut them in half again, it's more votes than we need.
Well, Mr. President, the challenge that you have is the data you have is wrong.
You're right. Say we've recalculated 2,200 ballots. It's enough for us to win. And that was Brad Raffensperger telling Trump that his data was simply wrong. On that call, Trump continued making false statements, trying to convince them to find votes, claiming he won by hundreds of thousands, bringing up more conspiracy theories.
I won this election by hundreds of thousands of votes. There's no way I lost Georgia. There's no way. We won by hundreds of thousands of votes. I'm just going by small numbers. When you add them up, they're many times the 11,000. But I won that state by hundreds of thousands of votes. Now, do you think it's possible that they shredded ballots in Fulton County? Because that's what the rumor is. And also that Dominion took out machines. That Dominion is really moving fast to get rid of their machinery. Do you know anything about that? Because that's illegal.
This is Ryan, Germany. No, Dominion has not moved any machinery out of Fulton County. We're having
but have they moved? Have they moved the inner parts of the machines and replaced them with other parts?
No.
You sure, Ryan?
I'm sure, Mr. President.
And what about the ballots? The shredding of the ballots. Have they been shredding ballots?
No. The only investigation that we have into that, they have not been shredding any ballots. There was an issue in Cobb County where they were doing normal, office shredding, getting rid of old stuff, and we investigated that.
So Trump just desperately grasping at straws. And then remember that in the end, even if he had somehow flipped Georgia, it wouldn't have made a difference because it would not have been enough electoral votes. Just one more clip from the old phone call, which happened after the one we learned about today. Trump suggesting that this is actually bad for Georgia officials. They might be liable if they don't find a way for Trump to get the win.
The ballots are corrupt, and you're going to find that they are, which is totally illegal. It's more illegal for you than it is for them, because you know what they did and you're not reporting it. That's a criminal offense, and you can't let that happen. That's a big risk to you and to Ryan, your lawyer. That's a big risk. All I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes.
So Trump there kind of implicitly threatening the lawyers and officials. If you let it happen, you could be criminally liable. So a totally criminal bully president, another recording, from another conversation coming out almost 2 months post-Trump leaving office. What will we know in another month? What will we know in a month after that? What we are learning is that the authoritarians who tried to overthrow the election were far more brazen than we previously thought. I don't think we've come even close to hearing it all yet. And when all is said and done, the biggest evidence is probably yet to come. They're getting access to emails and texts, which will give us the context and planning. Like this call, these two calls, they don't just happen. There's likely a paper trail about how this call came to be and about the intentions for these calls. And we may eventually learn about that. We'll have more coverage of this on the show Instagram at David Pakman Show, and make sure you're following me on Instagram at david.pakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The number one funding source for the David Pakman Show has been and continues to be membership. And membership is not just a feel-good thing. You get access to the world-famous bonus show every single day just for members, as well as commercial-free audio and video feeds of the show day in and day out. You can sign up for membership very, very quickly at joinpakman.com. That's joinpakman.com. If the normal prices strike you as high, by all means, use the coupon code BETTER21, all one word, all lowercase. Become a member today.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Today, we're going to be speaking with Nicole Perlroth, who's an award-winning cybersecurity journalist for the New York Times and also author of This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, the Cyber Weapons Arms Race. It's so great to have you on. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, David.
So let's just start kind of at the top level. I think a lot of people who are aware of a cyber threat and about the priority that this has become for so many governments may not really understand what a cyber attack might actually mean sort of for the average person. You might have a vague idea about, could you shut down a water system, for example, or paralyze an electricity grid or something like that. What do we mean by cyber attack? What are the types of things that could be done?
So for a long time, people's real experience with cyber attacks was really just the theft of their personal data or maybe their credit card information. And there was no real repercussions there. You know, you might have to deal with identity theft if it got really gnarly. But for the most part, your bank would probably pay you back if any money was stolen from your account or credit card information, that kind of thing. The problem is that these days we have rolled so much software into our critical infrastructure, like the power grid, like our nuclear plants, like our water treatment facilities and wastewater treatment plants, that all of that, those access points can be the target for a cyber attack. And in fact, we are seeing every year more nation state hackers, but also low-level cyber criminals target these systems. And so the attack that we really fear would be an attack that took out power and potentially contaminated the water. And actually, it would look a lot like what we just witnessed in Texas a few weeks ago when the power went out, the water supply was contaminated. And in the event of a cyber attack, which you could use cyber means to take out the power and contaminate the water. And we've seen Russia do that in Ukraine. And we just saw an attempt to contaminate the water supply in a small town in Florida the other week. Fortunately, it was caught. But the problem is with the cyber attack, there's also the possibility that hackers could keep those systems down. And when we've run studies here in the United States to see how resilient our critical infrastructure is to a cyber attack, some of those simulations have showed that it could be years before people were able to bring those systems back online. So I think we're a little bit better than we were when those simulations were done, but there's a real threat of a cyber attack on the grid.
So when it comes to the kind of identity theft, credit card theft stuff that many of us have dealt with, all of a sudden I had a period where like Uber and DoorDash charges were showing up on my credit card and the annoyance type stuff. It seems the motivation of the individual is basically to get free stuff, to get a free free takeout or a free Uber ride or whatever the case may be. When we start talking about things like shutting down a power grid, contaminating water, etc., correct me if I'm wrong, it seems we're talking about a fork that is more malicious for the sake of being malicious, of making a political point, of making an attack that may be more against an institution or a country or an organization. Are these two forks in terms of motivations, or is it more complicated than that?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, a lot of the attacks we have seen on critical infrastructure has been messaging. When Russia shut off the power in Ukraine, first in 2015 and then in 2016, they only did it for a few hours. And I really believe that was to send a message to sort of seed doubt in Ukrainians' mind that their new government had things under control. It was really political messaging and sort of hanging this threat over the population that Russia could turn off the power at the flip of a switch. Other attacks have had different motivations. We caught Iran rifling around the controls at a dam in the United States. Fortunately, it was the wrong dam. We have two Bowman dams. One of them holds back a tsunami's worth of water in Oregon, and the other holds back a babbling brook in New York. And they got into the one that holds back a babbling brook, and it was under repair. So it wasn't an actual threat, but, who knows what the message was there. I think it was probably just some sort of experimentation to see if they could get into these systems in case they needed to one day, unleash the locks at that dam. And that's more of what we're starting to see. We're starting to see nation state hackers get into these critical infrastructure systems, not necessarily because they want to do something immediately, but because we're all planning for some kind of geopolitical trigger where we might need to be in a position to turn off the lights or unleash the locks at a dam or contaminate the water supply. But each of these attacks essentially enshrines critical infrastructure as a legitimate target for a cyber attack. And at the end of the day, it's civilian populations who would suffer the results of those attacks. So it's getting more dangerous.
So this is one of my questions about how this fits into warfare more broadly, because, one of the things that's happened over the last 10 to 15 years is we've heard more about, and it actually has moved in the direction of the idea of a war that's like a boots on the ground war, the likes of which, certainly the first Gulf War, to a degree, the 2003 Iraq War. Things are moving away from that. Drone warfare is certainly part of it, but also so is cyber warfare. But a foreign power, for example, shutting off electricity in a large part of the United States, we understand the chaos that it will create. We understand the damage it can do. But how would it fit into a broader war in the sense of what would it be part of trying to accomplish for the foreign power that does it? I'm guessing it's not shut the power off so they can steal Florida from us and make it part of some other country. There must be, what would be the goal, or how would it fit in?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And it's an important question because you don't want to overhype the threat.
Right.
But it is the reality that Russia has been targeting our grid for several years now. A few years ago, the Department of Homeland Security published a screenshot that literally showed Russian hackers inside our power plants with their fingers on the switches that could turn off the lights. So we know that they have gotten into these systems, which begs the question, what are they doing there? At what point will they see some kind of incentive or motivation to turn off the lights? Right. I do think that this is all battlefield preparation for some future event, whether it's, a declaration of war. And this would be one element of that warfare, turning off the lights or shutting off the communication systems in the event that geopolitical tensions got so heated that one of these countries felt the need to do so. We have been hacking into Russia's grid. I broke that story with my colleague David Sanger a couple of years ago, partly as retaliation, somewhat for the election, but also for Russia's hacks and incursions of our own grid. But we've been doing it more as mutually assured destruction to say, I was going to say, it reminds me of like during nuclear weapon development. A lot of people say,
what is the circumstance where we would ever use even 10 of these nukes? Like what is that situation?
Right.
And it becomes this conversation of, well, if they did it, we would need to be in a position to do it, and being in a position to do it would disincentivize them from doing it. It has a sort of similar feel as you mentioned that.
Yes, it is our attempt at mutually assured destruction in the digital age. The problem is that nuclear analogies really don't fit so neatly in cyber. For one, this is all code, right?
Right.
We're attacking these systems with code. There's a low barrier to entry. If we hack a system, it is entirely possible for that attack to be discovered, for those methods to be discovered, for that code to be picked up and reverse engineered and retrofitted and used back on us. And in cyber, what we've noticed over the last 10 years is that people learn a lot from their adversary. We pulled off an attack with Israel on Iran's nuclear plant, where we broke into their nuclear facility, Natanz nuclear facility. We dispatched code that jumped from their Microsoft Windows systems into their industrial controllers. And we eventually used that code to spin their uranium centrifuges out of control or slowed them down. And we ultimately destroyed 1,000 of their centrifuges. No one has pulled off a cyber attack of that level of sophistication since. But what our adversaries have learned is they don't need to have the sophistication of that attack to do damage. A couple years after that attack, we saw Iran hit Saudi Aramco, world's largest oil company, Saudi Arabia,
right,
with an attack that just used rudimentary code to wipe out the data on their systems and replace it with an image of a burning American flag. And so we're all sort of learning after each other, and each attack has sort of built off the capabilities of the last. And unlike nuclear, where you need fissile material to drop a bomb,
right,
in cyber, you just need a laptop and someone with the skills. And increasingly, you can purchase those skills and code and capabilities off a gray market. So it's a really unregulated space. It is getting more and more dangerous, particularly as we digitize more of our infrastructure. And the thing I think people don't realize is that, America might still be the greatest offensive player in this realm. Like I said, no one has pulled off anything close to the attack we pulled off on Iran more than 10 years ago. But we are also the most targeted. We have more nation states and cyber criminals lined up at our borders, at our systems, knocking on the door, getting in a lot of cases, and planting backdoors. And we're the most vulnerable in a lot of cases because we are so wired, much more so than adversaries like North Korea and Iran, et cetera.
So on that note, I mean, in the limited time we have left, the reaction of some might be, well, we've got to pull all of we have to go backwards technologically. We have to get a lot of stuff that's currently networked off of networks, silo things, et cetera. In most instances, that's not really a solution to problems. Would it be the wrong reaction to this?
No, I mean, I think we do need to step back and think harder about the defense of these systems. 80% of America's critical infrastructure is owned and maintained by private companies. And any attempt to sort of legislate that they have better security has always failed. Lobbyists have always watered it down. So any attempt to secure our critical infrastructure has come in the form of an executive order, first under Obama, and then there was one under Trump. But really, these are all just setting voluntary standards for these critical infrastructure owners to up their security. And unfortunately, a lot of these systems are owned by small, medium-sized businesses, local municipal systems that simply don't have the security budgets or resources of a PG&E, say, here in California. So they have to rely on this outside network of contractors and supervisors. And the fact that they have to let those people in remotely creates an opportunity for hackers. So what do we do? If we're not going to legislate that these companies have to up their security, what do you do? And I think one of the things that we need to start talking about is creating better market incentives for these companies to up their security, giving tax credits maybe to companies who use two-factor authentication and have all of their software up to date and pass with flying colors on a penetration testing exam. Or perhaps it's time to exact penalties on companies who are not updating and patching their systems and allowing anyone to remote in. So I do actually think it's a really important question to ask ourselves, okay, if we're not going to let the government into these private systems, if we're going to rely on the market, well, the market has always led us down a path of further vulnerability because security has no return on investment.
Yeah, it's the Deepwater Horizon, the $500,000 valve that if you install it everywhere, you protect, but it's unlikely you'll need it everywhere, and then they install it nowhere at all.
That's such a great analogy. I hadn't thought of that, but that is the perfect analogy. And so we really need to have these conversations around how to lock up these systems. And, there's been some conversations about should we have a digital Geneva Convention? Should we set some kind of international norms of behavior where we would agree not to hack Russia's power grid and they would agree not to hack ours or hospitals or elections? The problem is we, the United States, will never agree to those norms because, one, we still have a huge offensive advantage. But also, two, we don't trust that our adversaries would hold to those agreements because they outsource many of their attacks to cyber criminals, to contractors and front companies. The attacks that we conduct out of the United States come out of the Pentagon Cyber Command or maybe the NSA if it's espionage or the other intelligence agencies. We don't rely on some security engineer at Google and tap them on the shoulder at night and say, tonight you're working with us. We just don't have that ability or plausible deniability. So we worry that if we ever agree to these norms, that these other countries would just sort of say, well, we won't do it, but they would outsource those attacks to
right. We
groups.
we don't really want to commit not to doing it, and we wouldn't believe that their commitment would be trustworthy. They may believe the exact same about us as well, and it makes it a very complicated situation. We've been speaking with Nicole Perlroth, who is a cybersecurity journalist for the New York Times. The book is This Is How They Tell Me The World Ends, the Cyber Weapons Arms Race. Nicole, really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show is audience-supported media, and you can contribute any amount you want on Patreon, as little as $1 per month. Plus, you can get the daily bonus show, world famous at this point, and the daily commercial-free TV show by making those pledges at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. This is audience-supported media. We depend on the support of our viewers and listeners. Whether you listen to the podcast, watch on YouTube, or watch us on TV, or even listen on the radio, patreon.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
This has to be seen to be believed, and it's almost as sad as it is unbelievable. Donald Trump has forced his way back onto Twitter. He's tweeting by writing letters, which are then published and retweeted by his kids and friends. This is a former president, folks. You might recall that Donald Trump was banned from Twitter some time ago for constantly, persistently, endlessly, stubbornly inciting violence and telling lies about the 2020 election results. He is now putting out statements through his Save America PAC, which are often duplicates from things he's posting to Gab, some kind of right-wing social network. And it's all on Donald Trump letterhead. But these are now tweets. He is publishing letters that are just tweets. Yesterday, Trump put one out that says, statement by Donald J. Trump, 45th president of the United States. Wouldn't it be fantastic if the legendary Herschel Walker ran for the United States Senate in Georgia? He would be unstoppable, just like he was when he played for the Georgia Bulldogs and in the NFL. He is also a great person. Run, Herschel, run. That's a tweet in written letter form. He figured out how to force his way back onto Twitter. I believe this is a ban evasion, but we'll talk about that. And then Donald Trump Jr. reposts it. And before you know it, Trump's tweeting, writing tweet-length letters posted by his family to Twitter. He then sends a much crazier one. And this is, I almost feel bad for the guy. This is one of the saddest statements I've ever seen from a president. Trump clearly triggered by yesterday's announcement from Joe Biden that the U.S. has secured an additional 100 million doses of the J&J vaccine. Donald Trump, quote, tweeting, sort of, writing a letter where he says, it's almost sad. Quote, I hope everyone remembers when they're getting the COVID-19, often referred to as the China virus vaccine, that if I wasn't president, you wouldn't be getting that beautiful shot for 5 years at best and probably wouldn't be getting it at all. I hope everyone remembers. Isn't there something really sad about that? These really are tweets. Now, I don't, what can Twitter really do? Can Twitter ban statements, written statements from the former president? No, I don't think so. I don't even think that they should. But if we're honest, this does violate the spirit of the ban. I mean, it is ban evasion, and it's all so strange and desperate. And I know that some are saying nobody should even mention that Trump is doing this. You're amplifying it by sharing it. This isn't about amplifying the content. This is about how Donald Trump has figured out a way in his desperation to be back on Twitter. He's figured out a way to circumvent the ban. It's about desperation. It's about tech regulation. It's about so many other things that we've been talking about on this show. But some aspect of this is also just really, really sad. I imagine Trump sitting there at Mar-a-Lago, eating his KFC and drinking his diets and his malts, as he likes to drink, and watching Joe Biden show up with, as we saw yesterday, the J&J CEO and the Merck CEO, and announcing everybody's going to be able to get a vaccine by the end of, we're going to have enough vaccines for everybody by the end of May. Not necessarily everyone will get one by then. It's going to take some time to inject them. We're doing 100 million dose deal. We may have so many doses, we're going to be giving them to other countries. And Trump wants to tweet, but he's off Twitter. So this is what he is now doing. It's both delusional, but also a little bit sad in some way. I'm not going to shed any tears, though, if that's what you're waiting for. That's the latest from Trump, forcing his way de facto back on Twitter. Yesterday, I talked generally about the White House press corps' apparent inability or lack of desire to ask serious questions of White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. We talked yesterday about the dogs and cats questions from the previous day. Today, I want to drill into a 2-minute exchange between Jen Psaki and Fox News reporter Peter Doocy. Now, I'm going to admit up front, because I think it's more interesting if I'm honest with you. There is a kernel of a good topic here that Peter tries to bring up, but he's so blinded by his desperation to be hysterical and histrionic and make the exchange as confrontational and dramatic as possible that what could be an interesting topic gets lost in the noise of hyperbole. I won't say more. Let's just hear the question and then we'll talk about it.
CDC tells these migrant shelter facilities that they can be at full capacity if they are careful about COVID. Many of them do. But when the CDC tells schools that they can open in person at full capacity, many of them don't.
Is there a school in particular that you have as an example that didn't do that?
Are most schools in this country at full capacity with in-person learning?
So the question in general is fair, but he asks it in a completely dishonest, deceptive, and needlessly dramatic way. He says, how can the same CDC be saying child migrant detention facilities at the border can be open at full capacity, but schools can't open at full capacity because it's too dangerous? The fair part of this question is that in both schools and migrant centers, both have the potential to have a lot of kids crowded together. And we have a pandemic. Why can one be open and the other one can't? That's a perfectly fair kernel of a question. Now, the circumstances, of course, are completely different. Kids in schools, most of them have parents, most of the possibility of remote learning. Not all, I understand. There's communication between schools and parents and kids. There's an apparatus where the relationship is completely different. The migrant children at the border, you can't say, we're going to do remote border facilities where you will be with your parents and via Zoom, you will join the border facility. Like, it doesn't even compute. It doesn't make any sense. The circumstances are completely different. In both cases, the CDC has put out guidelines and recommendations. The reason the guidelines aren't the same is because the scenarios are completely different and what's possible is completely different. But Peter is desperate to have these gotcha moments. And so what is actually a good topic gets lost to the hyperbole and histrionic questions. Let's continue with it.
Is there a specific school, though, that is not following the CDC guidelines of implementing the mitigation steps so they can reopen?
I mean, the CDC is saying schools, you can be every school can be at full capacity.
With the CDC guidelines, just to be clear, because I think this is very important to be very clear and specific on, they gave 8 mitigation steps that schools can take to safely reopen. A number of schools have actually recently reopened. Schools in Washington, D.C., some have, schools in many districts across the country. But each school district needs to make the decision about whether they are able to take those mitigation steps. The president has also been clear, some of these school districts need additional funding. There's $160 billion in this package that he's going to sign into law later this week. The Secretary of Education will be quite focused on working with school districts to help them reopen. But more school districts are reopening. More kids are in classrooms every single day.
So Jen Psaki points out lots of schools aren't open because they haven't met the guidelines. Some schools haven't met the guidelines because they can't afford to meet the guidelines without the COVID relief money, which was finally passed yesterday. So many schools are soon going to have the money to do what the CDC recommends and to get open. Like, that's substantive. That's important. This is separate from what makes sense. Now, we've talked about, does it make sense or not to open schools? Does the immigration policy make sense or not? I just want to focus on the hypocrisy of Peter Doocy that's created when in reality, these are very different circumstances. He's blinded by his unquenchable thirst for drama, maybe his desire to impress his dad, who's also a Fox News host, but he keeps going and then he changes his approach a little bit.
But since they are not all back, from an administration position or from your perspective, have the Border Patrol unions and the HHS unions been easier to work with than the teachers' unions?
I think that's a little bit of mixing different circumstances. I would say that
it's children all in tight quarters. I mean, a classroom.
Not quite.
Funny.
Not quite.
So Jen Psaki's opinion of whether it's easier to work with Border Patrol or teachers unions is really irrelevant. But eventually Peter gets to how he should have started, which is that both the border migrant centers and the schools are children in tight quarters. That's true. That's the similarity. What is different such that we have different guidelines? That's a fair starting point. It's not the way he went about it. Here's just the last few moments of this.
I would say that let's take a responsible approach to the two issues, okay? One is schools reopening. There's been 8 mitigation steps that have been announced by the CDC to implement, right?
Yeah.
Every school district is going to work to implement those on a timeline that is they can effectively do. Many school districts are reopening, right? Many are reopening every single week and day and week, right? That is a different circumstance than what we are seeing at the border.
So bottom line, Peter has a kernel of relevance wrapped in a veneer of gotcha. And Jen Psaki often handles parts of it well and then gets a little flustered for other parts. She's mostly good at appearing calm, even if we get the sense that she's frustrated. She does sort of have to be like the patient mom when the kids are misbehaving. But the important part is that this is the culture war sort of framing, where the context for everything is this is hostility towards law enforcement and deference to teachers' unions, for example. Like that's one cultural element of why this is framed in such hyperbolic terms. Or it's a purported left-wing double standard when the truth is, listen, circumstances are different in a school versus in a child migrant facility. And Peter Doocy will likely keep doing this for as long as Fox News keeps him in the briefing room, because my instinct is the Fox News viewer sees this and says, look at that. He's holding Jen Psaki to account. And Jen Psaki's doing a terrible job of answering these questions. That's my instinct of how the right sees Peter Doocy's participation in this. And to the extent that they like it, I would expect if places like OAN and Newsmax can get back in the press briefing room, I would expect them to do this, but scaled up like 10 notches. We have a voice, speaking of double standards, we have a voicemail number which you can call anytime. It's 219-2-DAVID-P. Yesterday, we talked about the Republican double standard between the Trump sexual assault allegations and the Andrew Cuomo sexual assault allegations. This caller rightly points out it goes well beyond just that as an example.
Hi, David. You raised a good point recently about the double standard regarding improper sexual allegations against men in government, and how, Trump actually got off very easily, but why is Cuomo being lambasted so severely? And my question is also about Supreme Court justices.
Right.
Clarence Thomas, who had very serious allegations lodged against him by a subordinate employee, continues to be on the bench for many years. And then also, I'm trying to remember the name of the one that Trump appointed.
Brett Kavanaugh.
I think his name is Brent. I don't remember at the moment, but that was also a many very, very serious allegations of sexual impropriety against him. But yet he continues on the Supreme Court, or highest court in the nation, our court of justice.
Absolutely. The double standard. I mean, listen, we can talk about the double standard with Bill Clinton. We can talk about the double standard with, Anthony Weiner, who was widely denounced and abandoned by Democrats. You could talk about the Al Franken situation. Certainly the Clarence Thomas situation is a good one. It is endless, endless, endless hypocrisy. And I'm glad to have the additional examples. We have a great bonus show for you today. We will talk about Milo Yiannopoulos saying that he's been converted out of homosexuality. We will talk about Idaho ending Powerball because they fear foreign participation. And we will talk about Arkansas passing a near total abortion ban and what this could mean for Roe v. Wade. All of those stories and more on the bonus show. Get the bonus show every day, not weekends, every weekday, by becoming a member at joinpakman.com. I'll see you then. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.